Hi everyone, I'm Netanel Bollag. Very happy to be here, very happy to join you. And I want to thank Natalie and team for inviting me. Um, I am a backend developer and I am very fascinated about reading documentations, and that will be the subject of our talk today. And I think I would say that it's a method. It's something that I recommend doing. It's not a must, but I think it's a habit that can really improve the skills and our daily work in the industry. And it's not even just developers. I think many types of roles can benefit from that. So when I'm saying documentation, obviously we think of libraries that we work with. We have our own code base, and there is the libraries we work with. Sometimes they are very intuitive. I would say good. I think many of us can agree that good code doesn't need much explanations to make it work. And many libraries we met like during our daily work, we kind of hop on, understand them on the go, on the fly. If they are very well written, we won't need to make too much attention and thinking about how to use them. We'll just use them and they will be intuitive, and that's great until something is stuck. Until something is not working as expected. And then we try to debug it. We jump from one thing to another. It's like, sometimes I feel we're developers, we play like the developer pinball game. Like we play, we try to do that, then it works, and then the ball stuck somewhere, but then the ball just popped back, and there is new bugs, and we try to debug them, and we jump from one bug to another. And in the long run, it's maybe good to build our knowledge in this way. But there is documentations to the libraries we work with. There is documentation to the programming language that we work with. It's maybe framework, operating systems, Linux manual pages. I don't know who of you met and fell in love with Linux man pages, but it's very important. There are also, yeah, I see you, Ola, and also there are, I worked in my previous role was as a real-time embedded engineer. If there are embedded engineers in the crowd, you can blink once. And there is also another types of operating systems which are not Linux. In my previous role, I used to work with various types of hardware devices, and they have their own data sheets, long technical documents detailing the hardware and how to connect with it. There are products also, like from the high level. Sometimes there is, I just finished a very long integration with another client of Claroty, and in the first time they gave me like a 30 pages PDF and told me that's our integration documents. You can read them. Like, everybody assume I won't read them, but I read them, and we will talk about how to do it. And there is high-level designs to our projects. And basically, this talk is related to any type of long text file we need to read, and is related to our daily job. The first thing that usually happens when I when I think about documentation is that we don't read them. We don't read them because we want the answer fast. Usually, we have a problem. We want it now. We don't want to dig. We don't want to see to search in the contents table where there is the answer. We want to get this information now. I think we all, it doesn't matter when you were born, I think we all now in the 2021 avoiding long texts. We are used to smartphones, reading long text. It's kind of a habit we kind of lost. We see an unfamiliar format, an unfamiliar long text, and we usually go like, hey, I'm not reading this entire page. And we are not used to read anymore. It's like a skill we lost. I'm not going to convince you to, I don't know, start reading books again every night before bed, but yeah, like it's a skill we lost and we need it. And I think this skill can really improve our daily work. So first of all, what I'm not talking about, okay, when you should not read the documentation, and that's important. If you have version release tomorrow or tonight or next week and you're really stressed out and time is really precious, you don't need to open the documentation, okay? Don't run to me and say, Netanel, you told me to read the documentation and I read it and it spent me a lot of time. That's fine. If I'm not talking about reading documentations of something you use, I don't know, once and never touch it again. I'm talking about reading documentations of something that you work with, okay? If you work with Integrity Artos, like I see here in the chat, so I guess knowing its documentation is a good thing. But if it's a one-time project, you work on it for a month and then you leave, you maybe don't want to do it. If it's the first time you ever meet new technology, if the first time you use a library, probably Googling it, Stack Overflow will give you the best answer. It's totally fine. I'm talking here about building a relationship with a documentation. Not every documentation worth it. Sometimes they're not mature enough, like human beings. And sometimes they're just, I don't know, auto-generated from the API and no one gave them a second thought. Just skip those types of docs. If it's your very first month as developer, I don't know, you have tons to learn. You don't need to do it, okay? And I think I'm kind of talking about this concept to people who already are into software development and they have some free time. There is not too much to learn. It's not like your first day in new job when you have tons of new stuff to learn. This is it. And about work, do not try this at work. Okay, I'm not talking like some people told me, I don't know, I don't do anything technical. I don't learn anything outside of working hours, and that's fine. I respect that. It's up to you. The habit that I'm talking about is a little bit time consuming. And I think spending few hours outside of working hours to make us a better employees and to improve our own skills who will serve us during the whole career and not just the current role. I see it as fine. If someone wants to try to find a way to do it only in its working hours, I don't know, there are people who are not working, like they have this time at work, and that's cool. But I wouldn't run into reading documentation in the first time when I actually have a problem. I would make sure to set an hour or half an hour in the morning, after lunch, in the evening, in the weekend, whatever fits you, and to try to build this. If you have tons of free times and it's either you will be on Twitter or reading documentation during work, be my guest, do whatever fits you. But that's my agenda. So it's a skill. It's a skill we need to develop. I sum up those points. I always check the first Stack Overflow answer. Sometimes I always check the second one. When I am in the fifth answer and no one's actually seems to understand my problem, I go to the docs. And I really recommend choosing one important, meaningful documentation who will be your partner to this journey and start investing time with it. And after you build these habits, I find myself after getting used to it, doing it all the time. Like just sometimes it's even easier. But usually, like now I'm in a new job, and we have a library for managing our database, which is pretty important, SQL Alchemy. I work a lot with it. There is a lot of pitfalls. There is a lot of stuff I hate in SQL Alchemy, and reading, and I just chose the docs, and reading them really helped me. So the whole concept of reading docs came out from the Talmud reading. The Talmud is a Jewish religious book. I come from a religious family. I'm not religious today. But I think the most important practice for male ultra-Orthodox Jews are reading the Talmud. It's a combination of law, philosophy, mythology stories, and some short, nice stories about daily life. It was written 1,500 years ago in the area of today, Iraq, back then, Persian Empire, Babylon, and like the late time of the Roman Empire. And it's important to the religious, and I think from age of 8 years till the age of 22, I read Talmud few hours a day. I'm not religious today, but it's still a habit I really liked. I really hated it in the beginning, but after a few years, you get used to it. And it's ton of text. And there are two methods in the Talmud to how to read it. And that's a concept I found very useful today to my job. One called Ki'ut, which is quantity, it's just knowing a lot. And the Talmud call it the desert rider, call it the Sinai desert rider. I don't know if someone here been to Sinai in Egypt for vacation, but the Talmud called this concept of quantity the desert rider. And the other type is Iyun, it's quality, more focused learning, and it's called the mountain climber. When we learn in the quantity method, you learn every day 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. Page of Talmud is a ton of information. It's really hard. It's in foreign language. It's not in Hebrew. It takes time to read it. So you spend like I think an hour, 2, 3, depends on your skills. You can read 2 to 4 pages of Talmud. You do it every day. You build your own knowledge base. And there is the Iyun in a good learning time and methods. When you really try to understand what it says, not just the surface, but to get a deeper understanding, people can spend 4 months reading 2 pages or 4 pages, because the two methods are really different. One is about understanding what is written. You just want to understand what is written. You just want to understand the surface. You understand it, you basically understand the concept, you move on. if you have questions, you can try to answer them, but if not, just ride on. Imagine like if you're in the desert and you want to ride from one place, like people who walk from Mecca to Cairo in Egypt, you just want to go through the desert. You don't want to, it's not about the friends you make on the way. It's about just getting out of the desert as fast as you can. And we talk about quantity, it's just about getting to know another new information. You know the page and you continue. Do you know every bits and bytes, every meter of sand? Maybe not, but you can hang around, you understand the surface of stuff, you can navigate. And that's the important skill, navigation. When you really try to analyze, it's like mountain climbing. You can climb up, you can try like 1 meter forward, can be 10 meters upwards. It takes time. You really need to know when you climb a mountain, you really need to know every place where you put your hand. It's really important. That's the more analytical way to read in the Talmud. Why am I talking about all that? The bottom line that I think the convention in the Talmud world is quantity is key to quality. When you have quantity of knowledge, you have a knowledge base. Maybe you don't understand it deeply, but you know how to navigate through the information. You know the basic concept. That's the point when you can really get a deeper understanding, when you can really analyze in the knowledge. So we start with quantity. And my suggestion to reading documentations is, first of all, focus on quantity. I'm first of all reading the introduction. I'm reading the introduction. I'm going to new documentation. I'm looking for the first page. Some libraries, for example, Django and Flask for backend development, have very good introduction. They actually explain not just what there is in the library, like what brought them. Like, why is Flask so thin? There are not many features. They didn't implement it much, and they explain their choices in the introduction. Django, from the other end, it's another concept. There is a lot, people say there is voodoo in Django. Django decided like other stuff. And reading those two introductions, I really enjoyed it. If you want to just have a really geeky fun, just go read them both, compare them. That would be a nice trick. So when I meet new introduction, I just first new documentation, I just read the introduction if it exists. The second thing, and that's a real hack, read every word in table of contents. And that's where the quantity gets, like, if you go into a whole table of contents, you may see many words you won't understand. You may see the chapter titles maybe won't tell you much. Just go through them. Read them all one time. You don't need to master it. You don't need to remember. You don't need to understand. Just go through it once. It will help you to navigate later. Like, maybe we'll talk about later, but what we're trying to gain here is to be familiar with this documentation. And it's easier to be familiar with something and to remember it when it's not the first time you hear this term. It's always easier to the human mind to remember something and to understand it after we saw it a few times. We start to recognize it. So it's pretty good just to read it, to see that this term exists. Maybe you won't meet it ever, but just go through it. And then I'm trying to read the first chapters. That's really depend on the situation, what is more relevant. If there is something that jumps on my mind, I will go for it. And that will be like my way to getting into my first introduction to this documentation. If it's very short, and sometimes it is, just read it all. If you can read it, like I would say, if it's short enough, so you can read it in, I don't know, 2 evenings, 3 times you sit on it. Oh, sorry. My slideshow, right? I'm not the only one who said it, right? I just quit. It's pretty weird, sorry.
Tim, could you pause recording? Oh, it's good.
Okay, good, we're back. So if it's short enough, just read it all. If it's not short enough so you can finish it in one time, read it in chunks. Try to find a way to split it. I don't know how much time, that's really depends how much time you want to, how much attention you want to pay into this whole thing. But I would say the benefit of reading everything, even if you don't understand it, even if it's not, it doesn't mean to you a lot, just going through all the chapters is really helpful, because all this concept is built on the idea that when you will really need something, you will read it for the second time. The second time you read something, you get it easier to understand it. That's how it works. Some stuff start to make sense, because when you will have a certain problem, you will actually read it slowly, you will play with the API, you will try to understand, and the knowledge will come back to you. So it's always good to be like there in the second time when you really need it, not in the first time. If it's really too long, don't read all of it, read some of it in chunks. For example, the best example is Linux man pages. I don't know if there is one human being who can read it all cover to cover. I don't know, maybe it's gonna be a nice thing to do in a conference, giving people like the full man pages printed and letting them sit in there days by days and read. And that's gonna be a cool thing to do, but it's not practical and actually not needed. But if you work with C programming, Linux kernel programming, going through every function you use, reading its man pages, it's mind-blowing. Reading fopen, fclose, like all the file handling commands, system commands you use, reading their man pages, that can sometimes there is stuff that can really help you become an expert in Linux kernel, and I really recommend that. So it's not about reading it all, but reading in chunks and reading some of it. When I say read, I mean read like we're in the 90s, you know, when we were focusing on one thing and one thing only, and like it's easier to read. Reading is easier when you give it its time and you read few pages. Like our mind is constantly FOMO. Do I have new notification in Instagram, in Twitter? After a few pages, our mind become a little bit more focused, silenced, and it's easier to read without distractions. And I think it's worth the time. You can read more. It's just easier, and you gain more from this time. And read every word. In Hebrew, I'm a very fast reader. And sometimes I can read a book. You know, there is Wheel of Time. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Wheel of Time. Yeah, there is now the series. You have there like sometimes 2 pages of rings on people's fingers, or I don't know, clothes and forest description, like, man, I want to get into the fight. Like, I read and I just skip and I don't really read every word. But when we're talking technical, it's pretty important to read every word. Sometimes you will have a chapter, like those words are not just written there. There is a real information. Sometimes inside of a paragraph, you can have a very important warning. I had a huge weird bug in ESP32. It's pretty popular among people who like to build IoT stuff at home. So I did a project with it at work, which I don't recommend. And we got, like, from a sensor, we got weird information, and that's destroyed the data science model, and we didn't know what to do with it. And I went through the documentation, and only the third time I actually read every word. And then I found out that there is a warning that you cannot use one bus driver when another bus driver, you cannot access, like, the flash memory. It's not really important, the flash memory during another bus driver. And those types of warnings, when you read every word, that's the type of stuff that will stay and we get into you. Like, a lot of information is forgotten, but I found out that those warnings, which are pretty important, sometimes they stay. And when we read newspaper, not every word count, but really understand something technical when you're not actually hands-on in the situation. It's kind of hard when you don't read slowly every word. But if it's too technical, don't try to understand it. That's fine, man. Just let's continue. Everything is good. We don't need to, like, really understand. Like, remember, we're about quantity. If it's too technical, you feel like it doesn't mean much. After a while, you will make a sense on the balance when it's worth it and when it's not. But if it's too technical, that's fine. You don't need to understand it. The second time you will read it, it will mean more. If the chapter takes too much time, just skip it. It's all about remembering. Okay, how much time do we have, Natalie?
We started at half and now it's the top of the hour. I mean,
okay.
I think it's interesting. Feel free to stretch a bit more.
Okay, great. And you see the Go documentation just?
Yes, we see the right website.
Okay, great. So I'm doing my first steps in Go right now, and I'm kind of excited, especially excited because now I will have what to say in Twitter fights between people who love Go and people who hate Go. But I tried to look at Go documentation. Actually, it was pretty nice. Like, it seems like someone actually made an effort. So there is no official introduction. It's the very beginning is very tutorial focused, which is cool. I don't know if and maybe guys here can say if I would learn Go from this documentation. I think I will try it. But just reading this page, which is kind of content table, gave me a lot. I saw this effective Go, which seems very important. In C++, there is there is like a guide on effective C++ written by the people who develop C++, and that's a holy document for me. It's pretty important to every C++ developer, and I saw it with Go. Seemed like extremely important. Going through more, I actually noticed how avoiding SQL injection risk just popped out every warning. So maybe I will go through and I will have a look at this one. and also like memory model, which is sometimes people use but never fully understand. And I also I've seen the wiki pages, and also went through there, and I started like to mark topics that's maybe interesting for me. And also best practices, and that's what would be the type of stuff I would start with. Like I would start with, and maybe from there like move on around. I felt like just navigating those two pages gave me a lot of information on what is the language, what is its main focus, what its main uses, what is like what's important to the people who write Go and develop Go to put like at the front, and it felt really useful. And Go for C++ programmers, man, I mean, where to sign up. Okay. So to sum up, what you will gain from reading documentation is sometimes you will find bugs that you remember the docs warned you about, or you will get like you want to write something and you remember that you read it in the docs. And if someone from another department come and ask you questions and you know the answer, don't say I read it in the docs, okay? Like, trust me, you will have less friends after. But it feels good when you know the answer because you read it. Like my nerdy soul find it's nice. And sometimes I don't remember what is written. Like sometimes 90% of the time I don't remember what is written. I remember seeing something about that. And that's the difference between Googling around the internet and going to the very place and opening this page and just read it. And I spent like, I had a question about SQL Alchemy. I spent, I don't know, 15 minutes as in Stack Overflow questions. It was actually the second sentence in the docs in this, if you Google the filter command, it just said what I was looking for in the second sentence. Like sometimes it feels harder, but after you get over this emotional barrier, because you're already familiar with the text, it's easier. Sometimes you don't remember anything, but you know where to look for it. And that's the place when it turns from a habit built on your own time to something that you actually use in your daily work. You will have context to understand stuff when you read them. It won't be the first time. Like sometimes the word service can mean something different in many libraries, in many frameworks. It can be similar, but a little bit different. But you know what service mean in this specific context that you read about. It will be easier to understand this word. You will feel comfortable with the format. Man pages format is not very friendly in the first time. There is a lot of headers and some stuff are bold, and you're not always, it's easier to read in the first time, but after you did it once or twice, it's pretty easy. And you will develop your reading muscles, and reading 2 paragraphs in the middle of workday can be a little bit hard in the 21st century, but you know, practice makes you best in it. And of course, like the most important thing is you can always save the time of reading the documentation. If you spend 8 hours of debugging, that's a trade-off many people does. Like, I don't need to read this, I don't need to understand it, I will just debug my way out of it. Okay. Thumbs up, reading pacebacks. Just read them when you need. Like, you know what? Even if you don't take this time to read them at home and everything I talk about, just try to read documentations. That would be good enough. Like, that can sum my whole talk. Remember that documentations are not perfect. There can be errors in documentations. I don't want to say it out loud. There can be errors in code too. Don't say I didn't warn you. Linux man pages. Choose the right docs. Okay, don't spend your time. If it's a library on GitHub, someone wrote it and never came back. Okay, documentation saves time, so you can, spend 1 hour to decide what to eat for lunch. I think this is it in my side. If there are any questions, answers, stuff you want to say, you're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you all. You are welcome to talk to me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Netanel Bollag will always lead you to the right person.
I would like to add one little thing. You said this about breadth and getting quick, covering a lot of topics, and then this mountain climbing, like getting deep into something and really understanding something deeply. I think this is something that is difficult to do in other ways. Right. I mean, the documentation is really the place to go to for that, I think. I mean, you can't do this with Stack Overflow or so, right? Or YouTube video tutorials or whatever else. You can understand a tiny little bit by debugging for a very long time, but it's not as efficient, and you don't get the full context and why this has been chosen and done this way, and so on and so on. So I recommend to, at least for some things that are important to you, to really read the documentation every once in a while.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel it's pretty easy to learn new stuff on YouTube and Stack Overflow. Once you are beyond beginner, it's very hard. It's very hard to find good in-depth materials. And this mountain climbing can only be like built on reading the actual text. Okay, thank you.